Well, welcome everyone. Aloha kakahiaka. Thanks for coming so early on your morning to learn about grass. And actually, just thank you for being here. Your presence here means that you really care, and the empty chairs means that you go out and you talk to other people about what you learned today and how it was really important to you in your work stewarding the spaces and places that you're responsible for. It couldn't be more timely and more important for us to be talking about this as we're seeing all the changes in our climate, recent wildfires, things that tell us that our systems are out of balance and they need our help. And I think one thing you're going to learn again and again from the instructors today is that we need to be actively engaged. The alternative is quite scary in terms of our ecosystems remaining in balance. So humans we're tasked with the kuleana to be active participants in keeping things in balance. It's not going to do it on its own. We're kind of past that point. So not to be depressed, start off something depressing. I hope it feels empowering to you that there's actually a lot you can do to keep things in balance. And it's not that difficult. It takes some labor, but it's good exercise, right? It's good exercise to be out there caring for the land. So I'm Sara Tekula. I've worn a lot of different hats on Maui over the last 21 years. But most of them have something to do with stewarding our spaces, along with my husband, Joe, who you'll hear from next, and actually our son, Henry, too. We've been big proponents for native plants, thinking differently about our relationship to land. And my current role right now is as the founding executive director of the Kula Community Watershed Alliance, where we're working on resilience along our gulches upcountry on Haleakala. So our connection to the reef, we are completely acknowledging that how we care for our backyards actually really matters. So I know a lot of you in this room are stewarding really important places, visible places, places where tourists and locals come to recreate, to play golf, to go out to dinner, to welcome guests. And these are some of the most visible and potentially impactful landscapes that you're caring for. So you guys play a really important role as stewards of these highly visible, high impact landscapes. So I want to thank you for being here and thank you for all the work that you do. Next slide. Oh, thank you. So today we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about grass a little bit, just a mini lesson in grass and what grass is all about. Why lawns matter, but then also why they don't. Environmental impacts of the lawn on Maui. Reef-safe alternatives to traditional lawns. Regenerative strategies for these open spaces and lawns. Making smart turf choices. So if you must have turf, how to go about that. And then of course, biodiversity and resilience, right? These are things that are not just kind of catchphrases or popular words. They actually represent something really important for our role as land stewards. So this is hopefully a practical and hopeful conversation. It's about the choices that you can make and the changes that can protect our reef and the land. And so I'm just going to plant a seed in all of you to maybe think about at least one of the things you hear about today in my talk, that you'll try to implement it, even if it's in a test plot. Next slide. So let's talk about grass. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can read a little better. So this is a fun diagram of grass. So grasses are unique because they grow from the base of their leaves. They don't grow from the tip where you see kind of flowers and And this growth pattern is made possible by a structure that's known as intercalary meristem. You don't have to remember that. But this allows grasses to survive frequent mowing, grazing from animals, and fire. If a fire moves through a grassland, it's just burning this top part, and it can grow back very easily. And actually, fire is a natural part of a grass's life. Grass that comes from where it's native from usually has fire as a normal part of the ecological cycle. So, it may be a little hard to admit this, but it was grasses that moved the Lahaina fire towards the homes that then led to an urban conflagration. But it started as a grass fire. And so the growing part, because the growing part is at the top, the plant can quickly recover from damage, which makes it really resilient, right? All the action is happening kind of down here. So grass is one of the most successful plant families on Earth. It first appeared when we had the dinosaurs cruising around, the late Cretaceous period. And it's in the Poaceae family, which is a group of flowering plants. So when you see grass fully go, you see it blooms at the top, yeah. So it's considered a flowering plant, even though we usually mow it so you don't see the flowers. But again, grasses are remarkably resilient. They're able to survive drought, grazing and fire, as we mentioned, by growing from that base. And many have deep fibrous roots, so that helps them prevent erosion and improve soil structure, right? And grasslands, many that are dominated by this species, the family that I just mentioned, they're major global carbon sinks, right? But monoculture turf grass does not provide the benefit that our natural grasslands provide, right? So when we're talking about the lawns at the hotels, they're not doing this thing that the grasslands actually do. The grasslands have some other things going on, and we're not going to get too deep into that, but it's worth researching grasslands. And I mentioned the connection to wildfire, so the importation of grasses to Maui, and there's a bunch we don't use for lawns, but that are incredibly flammable and problematic. You've heard about molasses grass, buffalo grass, all these grasses, right? Still they play a role in erosion control. So for example, when you look at the big ranches on Haleakala, that's kukuyu grass for miles, right? And kukuyu grass is considered invasive, it's considered flammable, but it's actually a really great tool in erosion control on the land. So I'm about to go in and rip grasses apart. So I just wanted to give them honor them, right? So this is something that we have learned over the years working with invasive species, is that we don't want to just hate on them, right? And be like, because anger is not a good emotion to have when you're caring for the land. You got to bring aloha to the land. You have to bring a hopeful energy, right? So what we try to do is honor the invasive, what they're really good at, and then say, but we don't need you here for that though. That was for your home place. You learned how to do that in your home place. We want to honor you. We want to use you. I'm going to talk to you about how to use grass that you've killed, because actually that's another way to honor it. Next slide. So why are we so obsessed with lawns? Guess where it comes from? It comes from feudal Europe, where there was one big landowner who had this might sound familiar, one big landowner that had lots of workers taking care, right? And it was used by the wealthy aristocracy as open grassy areas around castles and estates. And this was to provide clear sight lines for anybody who's trying to take their money, right? This is where the lawn comes from. So it gave you the ability to fend your castle because you could see if somebody was coming across your lawn. And it was also a way to display power and control over the land. It's like, look, I have so much help that my lawn is perfect, right? So it's a statement of power and control and wealth. And these lawns were maintained by grazing animals or manually hand cut with one of those scythes. Am I saying that right? Scythes? I forget the word. Scythe. Thank you. My brain went, wait, was that right? And this made it very, very labor intensive, right? So that labor that you were able to put on the landscape showed something about your wealth. And then also, we had another boom in the lawn in America post-World War II. Actually, my family, I'm originally from Long Island, New York, and my grandparents bought one of the first houses in Levittown, which was the first development. So you see these housing developments around Maui. The very first in America was where my grandparents lived. And so the lawn became, and by the way, this was the beginning of suburbia, which was supposed to be the American dream. You can move out of the city into, a more natural setting and mow your lawn and kind of own a little bit of land. And the houses were all cookie cutter, right? But the lawns were a standard feature, and they were marketed as a symbol of stability and status especially for people who were just leaving the war, who had a little bit of funding on the GI Bill. So the lawn became this cultural expectation at that point, where you're supposed to keep your lawn nice, and if your neighbor doesn't keep their lawn nice, it's obvious, because yours is mowed and theirs is not, and it became this sort of comparison game around who has a nice lawn, right? So lawns became this cultural norm, but that does not align with the ecological or cultural landscape of Hawaii. It's just been imported with all the people that have been imported, right? The one thing I will say, though, is the native kolea, our Pacific golden plover who lives here half the year, they love a little bit of lawn. So I'm not saying get rid of all the lawn. Like, do a nice, amazing native lawn, and then leave something for the kolea friends when they come back. Because there's nothing better than having them come back to you every year and kind of developing a relationship to them. But for the most part, lawns weren't a thing here until people brought it here. And fun fact, lawns are they're now the most irrigated crop, #1 in the United States. What do they do for us, those crops? They feed us? So it's just something to think about. Next slide. Oh, and this is fun. This is connected to the World War II promotion of the lawn, and also like women's empowerment was just being born. So it's all about the woman now. Even I can mow the lawn. Okay, so these are actual real ads for lawnmowers. Okay, moving on. So lawns come with environmental costs. So not just costs to the ecological and cultural integrity of Hawaii, which already, if you just make these big lawns, you've just erased practices that have been here for generations. But there's also some direct environmental costs. And there's a couple of talks after me that really dives into this. So this is a little taste of that. But over 50% of the potable water we can drink, is used for landscaping, especially lawns. They're very thirsty. Grass is a very thirsty crop. Guess what was a big grass-like thirsty crop that we grew for 100 years in Central Valley? Sugarcane, right? Very, very thirsty crop, which is what led to a lot of the water being diverted and all of that, right? Because it can't survive it's drought resistant to a point. But if you want to use it for production, for like keeping it perfectly green, and in the case of sugarcane, make a product, you have to constantly give it water. Lawn care often requires chemical inputs, which we'll hear more and more about today, that run off into storm drains harming marine life and coral reefs, especially for coastal lands. You know, when you're way up there fertilizing a lawn, it might not make its way down. Or if you're using some herbicide way up there, by the time they've done tests, so they're not really finding things that sourced way up high. I'm not saying that's okay, but I'm saying you're a coastal caretaker. This is really a short distance to the ocean. Lawns also contribute to biodiversity loss. So every place that we decide is going to be a mowed lawn is a place where native plants will not exist, or canoe plants will not exist. Maybe you throw in a few trees here and there around the lawn, but for the most part, that a few trees is not biodiversity. A plant community is what biodiversity is. Next slide. So let's talk about what lawns displace. So here's a coastal area in East Maui. It's not 100% native, but it's filled with a lot of biodiversity. You turn that into a lawn, and you're opening up the land for all kinds of things that could happen to it. First of all, which is not on my slide here, but without the shade, without the mid-story ground cover fern layers, you're missing on what the nutrient cycle is meant to be in that place. You're missing on what the water could and should do in that place when it rains, right? And with open space and exposure to sunlight, you're opening up to all kinds of invasives growing too, right? Which means you have to use herbicide, right? How am I doing on time? Pretty good?
Great.
Okay. So some things that lawns take the place of: shade trees, bird habitat, space for insects and pollinators to come get their food and do their business, the possibility for edible plants, which is a fun one. And then, of course, traditional ecological knowledge is completely displaced when you are now obsessed with keeping the lawn perfect. You're kind of in a totally opposite world once you're in that place. Okay, next. Wait, can you go back one more second? So I want to invite the audience for a minute to consider what gets pushed out when lawns dominate, right? And think about that in your own space, because every part of Maui has something that was there before that is being suppressed as long as you're mowing a lawn. The other thing that it displaces, when I want to say, when we talk about having that biodiversity, having a canopy, a mid-story, a ground cover, a fern layer, think about heavy rains. So you're displacing an important part of the water cycle and the hydrology cycle of that place. So if you have nothing but lawn and it rains super hard and you have any kind of slope in your landscape, water tends to sheet off because the grass is so thick. It doesn't give a lot of space for things to drain around it, right? So you know what happens when you get those soggy parts of your lawn when you're mowing the areas, right? And it rains really hard and then you step and you're like up to your ankle, right? Because it's not really gonna drain that fast. It'll drain, and there's lots of roots, but in a flash flood event, you are going to run off all kinds of stuff through your lawn. And the same thing happens like up on the ranches. You're seeing, it looks like, oh, it's all grass, it should be fine. No, no, no. Going through that at the base is a bunch of soil moving, all right? So the biggest thing that you're displacing when you create a big lawn space is the ability for that hydrology cycle to work. The water going down into the soil, not out into the ocean. So I encourage your reflection on, think about your space and place that you tend. And I encourage your reflection of what a more functional place-based landscape could look like in your place. And some of you are already doing this, so you might You're nodding. You might recognize how that is working in your space. But I think a really encouraging thing for you all to think about as land managers. Next slide. So really quickly, when I say we've displaced things with lawns, this is pre-contact Maui. These are all the different ecosystem types. There's actually a few more missing from here. Our wetlands are missing from this. But for the most part, you're seeing the pre-contact spread of all the different kind of ecosystems on Maui. Next slide. And this is where we are today of what's left. I just want that to sink in. And of course, all of the properties we're talking about here in terms of hotels, condos, and other, kind of heavily landscaped areas are all in the white zone. So in a way, when you start thinking about alternatives to lawns and you start thinking about ecosystem repair, even in small little pukas of your property, you're going to start adding to this map. You're going to add things back that used to be there. Let me go back to back one slide. Right? So you could be starting to patchwork together more of this and putting it back. Why do we want to put it back? Because that is the only key to our survival on this island. It's how our fresh water is born. It's how we keep our land from washing out to the sea. It's how we keep wildfires from rampantly taking over our areas. So there's some really solid reasons to do it. Okay, moving forward. Don't mean to scare anybody. So I'm just going to introduce you to a few friends. There's a long list of really great viable lawn alternative plants that are not trees, right? So if you want to still keep view planes of the ocean, and I know that a lot of that is a consideration, especially in like really highly visible places where you want to encourage people to gaze out at the sea and dream, and I hear you. But these are some nice low-lying friends, and there's more. But I'll just introduce you to the Aiae, which is the rain garden superstar. So the Aiae is like great for wet areas. So if you have that place you normally walk in the lawn and then you step and now you're in up to your shin in rainwater because it's like that really spongy part, make a rain garden with some natives. Next, one that I really love, Pau'ohiaka. She is silvery on the landscape, so kind of stands out, very visibly gorgeous, lovely little delicate flowers. And it's super culturally important. It's named after one of our major deities. Drought tolerant, and it supports that biodiversity. The flowers are going to attract pollinators, right? And then our friend pili. Pili grass is also very culturally important. It was used for thatching on the roofs of houses and all kinds of other wonderful uses. It's drought tolerant. It supports biodiversity as well. Another little friend who's not on here but gets honorable mention is the aki grass. This is great for sand dune restoration. It looks a little bit like pili, but a little greener, and has the flowers are a little more concentrated at the top. But another great one. And there's also a list of others that I don't have time to give you little introductions to today, but here's just a few. So native plants require less water, fewer chemicals, because they know this place, so you don't have to adjust them to this place. And they offer these ecological benefits that I mentioned. The other thing you can do, if you're not going to do natives, or natives of course can be incorporated into this, is xeriscaping. So you're planting with water conservation in mind, right? So if you go on water restrictions because you're in South Maui and it's dry over there, or you get them here too, if your hotel or condo or property has made a commitment to reducing water use, I see that a lot now, where it's like, throw the towel on the floor if you want us to wash your towel, because we're trying to conserve water, right? So same kind of thing, if you want to do this on your landscape, you can design with a purpose. You can build healthy soil, right? So healthy soil is gonna require you to water the plants less, because it has more ability to hold water right near the roots where the plant is drinking, right? And if you choose wisely, you mulch deeply. Mulching is a great way to keep the water from leaving through the heat. So when you're managing in Kihei and Lahaina, it's like no sense in watering the lawn in the middle of the day, right? Because it's just gonna evaporate. But even if you water at night, you want that to stay down. It's eventually gonna, heat rises, right? So if you wanna keep it down, you put things in the soil that are gonna hold onto it. Things like compost, biochar is a big one because it's like a big sponge. But then the mulch on top is preventing the heat from reaching your soil. Your soil will stay cool. And also the mulch will start to decompose at the very bottom and put all kinds of fun things in the soil that you want, beneficial microbes and like kind of organic matter. And then irrigate smartly. So think about how water is going to flow across the landscape. So no sense in irrigating your rain garden, for example. You don't need to waste water on that because the water is going to collect in that little area. But in areas or at timings that you, again, that idea of not watering in the middle of the day, just water at sunset, or like once your guests are all asleep, turn on the sprinklers. So xeriscaping is not just for deserts. A lot of time we hear about xeriscaping in like Southern California, for example, or Arizona. It's totally adaptive to our diverse microclimates, right? Because Hawaii is different. Every little nook and cranny of Maui has a slightly different. I used to live Honokauai and go Honokeana Cove for a surf, and just that drive, the weather could change. The conditions were a little different, and that was not a very long drive. So thinking about our unique area, what does the water do here? And try to landscape with that knowledge. We always talk about how one of the first steps in land management is to sit back and learn from the land. Every place is going to behave different. Every place is going to have the water moving differently through it. And that's something I can't teach you. And most teachers can't teach you unless they know the place really well and they point and they say, see this? See how the water's coming through here? Right, so that place-based knowledge is really important too for xeriscaping and any kind of landscaping. Next slide. So I want to talk to you about taking landscapes from pretty to purposeful. Now, pretty is the lawn that's perfectly manicured with the plumeria tree, and you've picked up all the leaf litter, and it's all like postcard perfect, right? Pretty doesn't necessarily mean healthy, though, guys, and I think we are learning that on all kinds of scales in our lives these days, but especially with land. If a land looks perfect, as a land manager myself, I feel suspicious. I'm like, what kind of abuse did this land take to look like this, right? It should, like wild and a little like feeling itself is what I want land to be. Just like I want the people that I love to be, right? So how can we take land from pretty to purposeful? We can do things like do certified backyard habitats. There's a program where you can do a certain, check some boxes on what you're doing in your backyard or in your property, and they will certify you a backyard habitat. Or you can do that on a hotel property. And then as people are walking by, there's a little QR code, and there's a talking point, a story you're telling about your values. And then people might go home and go, I want to try that backyard habitat thing. And next thing you know, we're getting that patchwork I talked about. There's also something called Homegrown National Park, which is similar. and where you're committing to native landscaping in your yard, where like our national parks all have the native species in them, right? So you can be like a mini national park. Same kind of thing though. You get, you can put a little sign out and you are listed on a database, and you get, it's little bragging rights. You can also plant food. There's so many, what I love about tree covery is there's so much food that is going alongside those plantings. And that is truly resilience for our community, is not just having ecological health, but having the people healthy. Beautiful, beautiful way to do something besides a lawn. And then of course, cultural relevance. Landscapes can reflect the ecological identity of a place. The ecological identity of place comes with mo'olelo, comes with tools, comes with food items, comes with all kinds of story and history related to those plants. And even connection to deities that people still, chant to, dance to, for, and keeping those plants alive keeps that cultural connection alive too. Next slide. This is just for fun. I know you're going to get my slides. But again, that rain garden actually should have been right before in the xeriscaping. But this is a diagram of how a rain garden works. I'm not going to go deep dive into that, but it's in the slides for you. So what if you have to have turf, right? How am I on time? Perfect. Okay. And I do want to leave a little time for questions, so I'll try to do 10. So I have to acknowledge that turf has functional uses. Things like play, running around, throwing the ball, all those fun recess time things that we get to do on the lawn, right? They're loved for these ability to run around, right? Easy run around because you're not worrying about tripping and you can see where you're going. Gatherings. So being able to gather with larger groups means you need a nice big flat open space, right? So a lot of our hotels have the big luau lawn, right? And you gotta have it because you gotta offer, And then also aesthetics, again, connected to what I shared earlier about how historically lawns have represented wealth and power and control. We still have that ingrained in us a little bit. Not everybody. I would say more so the folks who have subscribed to the more Western idea of wealth and power. It's not an indigenous concept, but a lot of that influence is here. It has made its mark, and we have to admit that that's also in the mix here at the hotels, at the condos, and it's just a reality. So my advice, use it only when you really need it. Luau lawn, totally legit. A space for the kolea birds to come half the year. Got it. But use it only when you need to use it. We're not trying to make some statement that we're like feudal England, right? People are coming to see Hawaii, so you don't have to worry about that. So some best practices, you can do what's called grass cycling. So when you mow the lawn, instead of filling up the bag with your clippings and hauling that somewhere, just let it land. Grass cycling is a simple practice, and it's where you use the lawn clippings left on the grass. Instead of being bagged and removed, it returns nutrients like nitrogen to the soil. It reduces the need for your fertilizers and improves the soil health. All those are very good thumbs up things. It also reduces your green waste needs going to the landfill. It conserves your time and labor, and of course the oil that you needed to use to get to the landfill, back and forth, probably in a big truck, right? There's some, I'm not an expert on what is the best species of grass to use, but these are two, Seashore paspalum and zoysia. The first that I mentioned needs more mowing. The second that I mentioned can be slow growing and go dormant in droughts. You know, things like Bermuda grass can be very invasive. It can escape your lawn, and you don't want that. So I'd say one of the things you can do is just research for your area. What do you need? Do you need well draining? Do you need drought tolerant? Do you need something that, you know, doesn't need to be mowed that much? Like, think about all of those different ways that maintaining a lawn is an impact for your particular location, and then choose a grass that's going to behave better or require less inputs and expense to the environment. Also using smart irrigation systems that kind of turn on and off, and you can adjust according to whether it just rained, that kind of thing. And then of course, using things like compost, which is going to improve your soil structure in the grassy area. It's going to enhance moisture retention, add those beneficial microbes. You can also use biochar. Forgot to mention in my introduction, I'm co-owner of Haleakala Biochar, where we're making biochar out of invasive hardwoods up country and then using it as a soil amendment that's readily available. And we grind it up really fine, like ground coffee. So what you can do there is you can broadcast it onto turf grass and just water it in, like broadcast it right before you water, and it'll go down. And what it does is it helps obviously sequester carbon because it's pure carbon, but it also increases the ability to hold nutrients. It gives, Joe likes to call it an apartment complex for microbes. So it puts a little home in there, microscopic home for everybody to move into, and it promotes that cycle that we want. And it reduces the need for external inputs. You don't have to really put much else in. If you put some compost or compost tea and biochar together, it'll do the job. So these natural amendments support long-term soil health, which is something that I think is an important thing to kind of shift your focus on, rather than like short-term looks good today, I'm going to swap that out, make it look good tomorrow. Thinking long-term about the care and like making that part of the story of your property. That like, yeah, just like when you have a little wing of a hotel that's under construction, you're like, pardon our dust. You could do the same thing on the land and be telling a story about how you're converting from this to be more sustainable. And it's also helping us reduce our use on the chemicals that can harm the coral reefs. Next slide. Just about to wrap up. So the other thing we talked about, when you have a lawn, you do not have biodiversity. So why is biodiversity something we should value on the landscape, where we're having a bunch of different plants living together in harmony, each doing a certain job? So native and climate adaptive plants can create these resilient landscapes. They can resist pests. They can require fewer chemicals. They can keep invasives out. They attract pollinators. We have both native and non-native pollinators here, but they still pollinate, so we're not mad at them. They improve the soil, and they're more likely to bounce back after storms, right? So biodiversity equals resilience. And the reason for that is that you have all of these different species working together to form that biodiversity, which means it's less likely that this ecosystem will collapse. If you have one species and it's for miles or acres, and then you have something come, because we import a new invasive species every 2 weeks, if you have something come and show up and wipe out that plant that you have for acres, you're done, right? That landscape is collapsing. You're going to have some emergency work to do. With biodiversity, you have a bunch of different plants doing parts of the job. So you're kind of spreading the work around versus making one species of grass, blade by blade, do all of the work. So you're more likely to bounce back after a storm, or even fire if you have biodiversity. So, next slide. Thank you. So what am I asking you to do? You're of course you're gonna walk away with a call to action. I would like you all to pick one thing you learned today and try to implement it where you work. Even if it's just a test plot. Because how many of you have lawn at a property you care for? And that includes golf courses. Everybody, right? So if you have the power, or if you want to try to make suggestions to people who do have the power to kind of direct your priorities, say, can we try this one thing I learned about? I think it would really work for us. I took that reef-friendly landscaping course. I got certified. So can we, that was not for nothing, right? Let's do something. So bring a project to your land. And that just is not just for my talk, but all the talks today, try to grab a nugget that you can take home with you. So a few things you can do. You can just replace a section of lawn. Every square foot matters. So just replace a section. A nice way to go would be the rain garden idea, right? Because you don't want your visitor who's dressed all nice with her high heels to go walking across the lawn and then turn her ankle because she dropped into a mushy rain garden space, or future rain garden space, or even yourself. Who wants to walk around with a soaking wet boot all day, right? So maybe say, hey, I've noticed that the water collects here. Can we maybe make a rain garden? I learned a little bit more about it, and I have this diagram that Sara gave me, right? You can also plant a native ground cover. We talked about some of them today. You can educate guests and residents about reef safe practices. And that's just beyond the sunscreen, which I think is a more common thing people think about. But talk about what you're doing right here to prevent coastal erosion, what you're doing here to prevent runoff from the golf course. And again, every square foot matters, and you have the ability to set the standard, right? Or at least influence what the standard is. So let's help protect the ecosystems that make Maui special for visitors, for communities, and for future generations. Next slide. So I think I have time for a little bit of questions. Yes. And tell me your name.
Bailey.
Bailey.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, how would you go about, so say you have a bunch of different invasive grasses in a lawn that in a place that you often frequent or take care of, maybe it's at home.
Yeah.
How do you go about removing certain invasives and implementing the natives that you spoke of?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be very place specific. I would probably recommend something different if you're right next to the ocean or a stream, an active stream, versus in another part of the island. Grasses are a pain in the butt. And you need to be able to outcompete them. So it's a very manual process. I will say I've seen some successful restoration projects where grass was a huge nightmare. And I know this is maybe not a good word to say here, but a small, concentrated, careful use of herbicide in an area that you know you're going to plant in. Once the half-life and all that time has gone, you followed the instructions. As long as you have the ability to mulch that area, which will suppress the regrowth, and plant something that's gonna, like a'ali'i, something that gets bushy pretty early in its life and starts to shade it out. Shade is your friend when it comes to invasive grasses, and we're dealing with wattle explosions up in Kula. I'm working in that Kula burn area. And so I think it's like very place specific, species specific. You can sickle it, keep sickling it until the thing's growing. Like that's the more mechanical way. weed whacking and mowing and kind of protecting that's hard to do and protect your plantings. But again, it's about out competing. And I think Joe, if you wanted to share, Joe deals with this on a regular basis with kikuyu grass.
I attack a lot of invasive species. Scientifically, there's 3 methods. There's mechanical, there's chemical, and there's biological controls. So no matter what of any kind of invasive species, you're going to do one of those 3 key options. The mechanical is a forever thing. If you cut 1 invasive species, it'll turn into 2, and then you cut 2, and they turn into 4, and then 8. So it's constant management for the mechanical. But like Sarah said, it's place-based, it's species-based. But if you're gonna treat invasive species, it's either mechanically, chemically, or biologically.
Yeah, and the wood chips or the mulching it to suppress it. Some people use weed mat. And one thing I'd say with weed mat is unless you have a strategy to remove it, it will just become part of your landscape.
Yeah, I've had to work with that.
Yeah, and that's the big challenge here, right? We get year-round sun and rain, and these plants are not used to that where they're from, and so they just proliferate. And yeah, our whole world for years, our first date was slippers, which is not a good idea, chainsaws, wattle trees.
Yes.
We are still, actually, I will say, Joe, we're almost exactly 25 years from that day.
Oh.
Sorry, 20 years from that day. 20 years.
We have more PPE.
We're still doing it. We are still killing wattle in the same part of Kula. So mechanical is a forever job.
I will put, I've just done this in my own yard, and I don't know that it's the best option, but it's what I can wrap my head around and know what this thing is. I will put apple cider vinegar or any kind of vinegar.
Vinegar's good, yeah.
It's so good.
It's very good.
But I do wonder if you know how long does that stick around in the soil, what does that do to the inhabitants?
So I'm not sure about vinegar. Do you know how long vinegar?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm doing good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right.
Yeah, vinegar will kind of burn the plants or whatever.
It's not going to, the plant isn't drinking the vinegar, right? The way it would drink a small amount of herbicide. That would go into its vascular system and make sure it just decomposes right there. And of course it's a chemical, but just like all, when we take a Tylenol, and actually the vinegar is having a chemical reaction on the plant. It's just a different kind of chemical.
It also has a reaction with the soil's microbiology.
Yeah.
Because I use vinegar to clear out my compost tea equipment because it kills off the fungal pathogens and stuff, but it'll also kill the beneficial stuff too.
That's what I worry.
But it's temporary, it's not like dumping paraquat on it or something like that.
Yeah, it's temporary. There is a chemical process that happens, but it's very short. That's the thing. And it's also it does the burn and then it doesn't do any other harm. Whereas with an herbicide, you have to wait, depending on what it says, 12 hours, 24 hours. I always double whatever it says. But you can plant right into the land after that and get going building healthy soil. In that one spot, it might be a little upset with you, but once you build around it, you're going to prevent the runoff. You're going to bring the health back. And I know that's probably, it wasn't part of my presentation, but it is a tool in the toolbox. But suppression, another biological control is something like the wood chips, getting it as short as you possibly can, thick cover, immediate plan to plant, because grasses will make their way. They're very resilient. They will find light. So, good question though. The answer is that it's challenging, complicated, and place specific. Any other questions?
How can people get in touch with you?
Oh,
Want to reach out?
I don't have that on my last slide, I don't think, do I? No. You can find me a couple of ways. Haleakalabiochar.com. We also have a social media, so Haleakala Biochar. You could DM us, whatever, either way. If you're interested, and this is not meant to be like a big plug, but we're happy that we finally have our biochar in stores. We're not on the west side yet, but we're at Maui Power Equipment. We're at Eco Products Maui and Kahului, and then some places up country. You can learn all that on our website. The other thing that would be great, if you're interested in following the work that we're doing up in Kula for the fire recovery, we're having these conversations, right, with all the landowners, because they had grass, they had landscaping, and they're trying to figure out how to make it. They're starting to think of themselves as part of the watershed now, because everything burned in a gulch there. And so everybody's going, I live right on the gulch, and I'm seeing what's in my yard moving that way when it rains. And the 2 and 2 is getting put together up there around how to be a healthy participant in our watershed health, which then leads to reef health, so that mauka to makai or ahupua'a kind of thinking. So if you want to follow that, that's Kula Community Watershed Alliance or kulacommunitywatershed.org. Thank you very much.